Section 1. Early Life and the Beginning of Violence. In Sacramento, California, on March 14, 1946, Theresa Jimmy Francine Cross was born to Swanee Gay Myers and James Jim Cross. She was the younger of two daughters, with an older sister named Rosemary Norris. Theresa's mother also had two other children from a previous marriage. The family lived in a modest house in Rio Linda, a small community near Sacramento, where her father worked diligently as an assistant cheesemaker at a local dairy, eventually saving enough money to purchase their family home. The Cross family dynamics changed dramatically in the late 1950s when James Cross was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. The illness forced him to quit his job, triggering depression and causing him to take out his frustrations and anger on his family. During this difficult period, Swanee Cross became the family's primary breadwinner, keeping them financially afloat despite the challenges. Throughout these turbulent times, Theresa maintained an extremely close relationship with her mother. Tragedy struck on March 2, 1961, when Theresa's mother died of congestive heart failure. At just 15 years old, Theresa was devastated by this loss. Unable to maintain the family home after his wife's death, James Cross sold the house, further destabilizing Theresa's sense of security and belonging. Less than 2 years after her mother's death, on September 29, 1962, the 16-year-old Theresa married 21-year-old Clifford Clyde Sanders, whom she had met only a few months earlier. Immediately after the wedding, Theresa dropped out of high school and became pregnant. On July 16, 1963, she gave birth to her first child, Howard Clyde Sanders, at the age of 17. The marriage quickly revealed itself to be troubled and volatile. Theresa displayed extreme possessiveness and paranoia, constantly accusing Sanders of infidelity without evidence. The couple's arguments became increasingly frequent and intense. On June 22, 1964, Theresa claimed that Sanders had punched her in the face during one of their arguments. She reported the incident to police but refused to press charges, resulting in the assault allegations being dropped. Just 2 weeks later, on July 6, 1964, the day after Sanders' birthday, the couple had another heated argument. Theresa was furious that Sanders had spent his birthday celebrating with friends instead of at home with her. During this confrontation, Sanders allegedly informed Theresa that he was leaving her. In a rage, Theresa grabbed a rifle and shot Sanders in the back as he walked toward the door, killing him instantly as he tried to exit their home. Police arrested Theresa and charged her with Sanders' murder. At her trial, Theresa, who was pregnant with her second child, pleaded not guilty, claiming she acted in self-defense. She portrayed Sanders as a violent alcoholic who had physically abused her throughout their marriage. This characterization was strongly contested by several of Sanders' relatives, who testified that he was neither violent nor abusive. Sanders' sister, Lydia Hansen, told the court that Theresa was pathologically possessive and jealous, stating that Theresa would kill Sanders before any other woman could have him. Despite this testimony and the prosecution's argument that Theresa killed Sanders maliciously and without provocation, the jury acquitted her of the murder charge on September 22, 1964. On March 16, 1965, Theresa gave birth to her second child, Sheila Gay Sanders. Following Sheila's birth, Theresa's behavior became increasingly concerning as she began drinking heavily. She became a regular fixture at the local American Legion Hall, often leaving her young children for extended periods. During this time, she met Estelle Thornsberry, a disabled United States Army veteran. The two began a relationship and eventually moved in together. Throughout their relationship, Theresa routinely abandoned her children with Thornsberry while she went out drinking, sometimes disappearing for days at a time. When Thornsberry confronted her about these absences, Theresa became defensive and hostile. The relationship ended abruptly when Thornsberry discovered that Theresa was having an affair with his best friend. Shortly after the breakup with Thornsberry, Theresa met Robert Knorr, a United States Marine Corps private. Their relationship progressed quickly, and Theresa soon became pregnant. The couple married on July 9, 1966. Over the next 4 years, they had 4 more children: Susan Marlene, born September 27, 1966, William Robert, born September 15, 1967, Robert Wallace Jr., born December 31, 1968, and Theresa Terry Marie, born August 5, 1970. Like her first marriage, Theresa's relationship with Robert Knorr was characterized by extreme jealousy and frequent accusations of infidelity. Both spouses exhibited volatile behavior, and the household became a battleground of domestic violence. Robert and Theresa would routinely beat each other, and the children were often caught in the crossfire of their violent disputes. The physical abuse of the children began during this marriage, establishing a pattern that would later escalate to unimaginable levels. Fed up with his wife's relentless accusations and controlling behavior, Robert Knorr left Theresa in December 1970. The couple was formally divorced in 1971. After the separation, Robert attempted to maintain contact with his children, but Theresa aggressively prevented him from seeing them, effectively cutting off any potential source of protection or intervention for the children. Following her divorce from Robert Knorr, Theresa married twice more. In 1971, she wed railroad worker Ronald Pulliam. This marriage quickly deteriorated when Theresa began leaving her children with Pulliam while she stayed out all night drinking and partying. Pulliam divorced her in 1972 after becoming convinced she was having an affair. Theresa's final marriage was to Sacramento Union copy editor Chester Chet Harris in August 1976. During this brief marriage, Theresa's daughter Susan grew close to Harris, triggering intense jealousy in Theresa. She filed for divorce from Harris in November 1976, just 3 months after they wed, allegedly after discovering that Harris enjoyed taking consensual nude photographs of women. With each failed relationship, Theresa's behavior toward her children became more erratic and abusive, setting the stage for the horrific events that would unfold in the coming years. Section 2. Escalating abuse and isolation. Following her fourth divorce in 1976, Theresa Knorr's abusive behavior toward her children intensified dramatically. She gained a substantial amount of weight and became increasingly reclusive, disconnecting the home telephone and forbidding her children from having any visitors. This isolation served to conceal the horrific conditions inside the household and prevented the children from seeking help. For many years, the family lived in Orangevale, California, before moving to a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in Sacramento. Theresa's eldest son, Howard, reportedly left home before this move, escaping the worsening abuse. According to neighbors, the Sacramento apartment was filthy and permeated with the smell of urine. Those who glimpsed the children noted they appeared fearful, nervous, and high-strung, never allowed outside by their mother. Within the walls of their home, Theresa subjected her children to systematic torture and abuse. She beat them regularly, force-fed them, burned them with cigarettes, and threw knives at them. On one occasion, when a knife struck one of the children, Theresa simply cleaned the wound and stopped the bleeding without seeking medical attention. She created a special beating paddle and forced her children to hold each other down while she assaulted them. In one particularly terrifying incident, Theresa held a pistol to her youngest daughter Terry's head and threatened to kill her. While all the children suffered, Theresa primarily focused her rage on her daughters Sheila and Susan. According to Terry in later interviews, her mother resented that her older sisters were maturing into attractive young women while she faced the prospect of losing her looks as she aged. This jealousy fueled much of the abuse. Theresa developed a particular fixation on her daughter Susan, believing that her fourth husband, Chet Harris, had somehow turned Susan into a witch. This paranoid delusion caused Susan to receive the most severe abuse. After one particularly brutal beating, Susan fled from home. Police found her and placed her in a psychiatric hospital where she reported her mother's abuse to the staff. When authorities contacted Theresa, she denied the allegations and convinced hospital personnel that Susan had mental issues. Without further investigation, authorities released Susan back into her mother's custody. Upon Susan's return, Theresa immediately punished her for speaking out. She beat Susan while wearing leather gloves and forced her siblings to take turns participating in the assault. Following this incident, Theresa's control over Susan became absolute. She handcuffed Susan to the kitchen table and ordered her other children to stand guard over her. Susan remained handcuffed under the table for 2 years, occasionally allowed to move only when pressure sores developed on her body. Theresa force-fed her and, if Susan vomited, forced her to eat her own vomit. Theresa had previously forced Susan to drop out of school and forbidden her to leave the house. She subsequently pulled all her other children out of school as well, removing their access to phones and prohibiting them from going outdoors. Most of the children never advanced beyond the 8th grade, further isolating them from any potential sources of help or intervention. The children lived in constant fear with no outside contact or education, completely under their mother's tyrannical control. This environment of extreme isolation and escalating abuse set the stage for the even more horrific events that would follow. Section 3. The murder of Susan. After 2 years of being tortured while handcuffed under the dining room table, Susan Knorr reached her breaking point. In mid-July 1984, she begged her mother to release her, promising to do anything Theresa asked if only she could be freed from her restraints. On the morning of July 16, 1984, Theresa went on a violent rampage, physically attacking all her children. During this outburst, she briefly uncuffed Susan, but maintained control by handing her youngest daughter, Terry, a gun, instructing her to shoot Susan if she attempted to move. While Theresa and the other children were in the kitchen preparing oatmeal, one of them dropped a spoon. The sudden noise startled Terry, causing her to accidentally pull the trigger and shoot Susan. After the shooting, Theresa showed no concern for her wounded daughter. Instead of seeking medical attention, she immediately rechained Susan under the dining room table. Her primary reaction to her daughter's profuse bleeding was anger that blood was staining the carpet. Rather than taking Susan to a hospital, Theresa decided to nurse her back to health on her own, moving her to the bathtub where she remained for several weeks. Remarkably, Susan survived the gunshot wound. As she began to recover, she continually pleaded with her mother to let her leave the house. Theresa imposed a condition: she would remove the bullet herself before allowing Susan to go. While Susan was unconscious, Theresa gouged out the bullet with a knife, a crude procedure that led to infection and sepsis. Later that same day, Theresa packed all of Susan's belongings in trash bags. She bound Susan's arms and legs and placed duct tape over her mouth before ordering her sons, Robert and William, to put her in their car. The young men drove their sister to a remote area near Squaw Valley, where they placed her on the side of the road along with the bags containing her belongings. Following their mother's instructions, Robert doused both the bags and Susan with gasoline and set them on fire. Robert believed his sister was already dead, but horrifically, Susan was still alive when she was set ablaze. Her still smoldering body was discovered the following day. Due to the severe condition of her remains, authorities were unable to make a positive identification, and Susan was classified as homicide case Jane Doe 4873/84. She was just 17 years old at the time of her death. Section 4, the murder of Sheila. Following Susan's death in July 1984, Theresa Knorr redirected the majority of her rage and abuse toward her oldest surviving daughter, 20-year-old Sheila. In May 1985, Theresa forced Sheila into prostitution to financially support the family. Theresa herself did not work, instead relying on unemployment benefits from the state of California and now the money her daughter earned through prostitution. Initially, Theresa was pleased with this arrangement because of the substantial income Sheila generated. For the first time in years, she allowed Sheila relative freedom to leave the house whenever she wanted, primarily so she could work the streets and bring home money. However, after just a few weeks, Theresa's attitude abruptly changed. She became intensely angry and accused Sheila of being pregnant and having contracted a sexually transmitted disease. Theresa claimed she had caught the disease from Sheila through a toilet seat they shared. When Sheila denied these accusations, Theresa flew into a rage. In a brutal attack, Theresa severely beat Sheila before hog-tying her and locking her in a tiny closet with no ventilation. Theresa explicitly forbade her other children from giving Sheila any food or water, or opening the closet door under any circumstances. Despite this prohibition, Terry disobeyed her mother and secretly gave Sheila a beer, the only sustenance Sheila would receive during her confinement. Terry later explained her mother's methodology. She wanted Sheila to confess. That was Mother's way. Beat them until they confess. To end her torment, Sheila eventually falsely confessed to being pregnant, hoping this admission would satisfy her mother. Instead, Theresa accused Sheila of lying and refused to release her from the closet. After 3 days of extreme dehydration and starvation in the airless closet, Sheila died on June 21, 1985. Theresa left Sheila's body locked in the closet for an additional 3 days before checking on her and discovering she was dead. Once again, Theresa ordered her sons, William and Robert, to dispose of their sister's body, which had begun to decompose, filling the apartment with a foul stench. The young men placed Sheila's body in a cardboard box and disposed of it near Truckee Tahoe Airport. Sheila's body was discovered just hours after it had been abandoned, but was never positively identified. Authorities classified her as Jane Doe 60-600 and 7-85. Although Sheila's remains had been removed from the apartment, the odor of decomposition lingered. Theresa became increasingly paranoid that the smell and physical evidence in the closet could implicate her in Sheila's death. On September 29, 1986, More than a year after the murder, she moved the family's belongings out of the apartment and instructed Terry to burn it down to eliminate any physical evidence. That night, Terry poured 3 containers of lighter fluid on the apartment floor and set it on fire as directed. Fortunately, neighbors quickly reported the fire before it spread significantly, and the closet where Sheila had died remained largely undamaged. This preservation of evidence would later prove crucial to the investigation, as authorities would eventually be able to remove the subfloor from the closet to test for physical evidence linking Theresa to Sheila's death. Section 5. Escape, Investigation, and Justice. After abandoning the Sacramento apartment in September 1986, Theresa Knorr went into hiding. Her 2 adult sons, Howard and William, severed all ties with their mother. 16-year-old Terry also managed to escape, using her deceased sister Sheila's identification card to pass herself off as a legal adult. The only child who remained with Theresa was 19-year-old Robert Knorr Jr. Together, they relocated to Las Vegas, Nevada, attempting to maintain a low profile. In November 1991, Robert Knorr Jr. was arrested after fatally shooting a bartender during an attempted robbery in Las Vegas. He received a 16-year prison sentence. Shortly after his arrest, Theresa fled Las Vegas and moved to Salt Lake City, Utah, fearing increased scrutiny. After escaping from her mother, Terry tried repeatedly to report her sister's murders to authorities. She approached the Utah police with her horrific story, but they dismissed her account as fictional. A therapist she consulted also failed to believe her. These rejections prevented the case from moving forward for years while Theresa remained free. On October 28, 1993, nearly a decade after Susan's murder, Terry made a crucial call to the hotline for the television program America's Most Wanted. The show's staff directed her to contact detectives in Placer County, California, where Susan's body had been discovered years earlier. Unlike previous authorities, Placer County detectives took Terry's claims seriously and launched a thorough investigation. The detectives quickly connected the 2 unidentified Jane Doe cases from 1984 and 1985 to Terry's detailed accounts of her sister's deaths. On November 4, 1993, police arrested William Knorr in Woodland, California, where he had been living and working. When questioned, William corroborated Terry's story in remarkable detail. Investigators also interviewed Robert Knorr Jr. in prison in Ely, Nevada, where he too confirmed the accounts of his sister's murders. On November 10, 1993, law enforcement officers arrested Theresa at her home in Salt Lake City. At the time of her arrest, she was using her maiden name Cross and working as a caregiver for her landlord's 86-year-old mother, having successfully hidden her identity and past for years. On November 15, 1993, authorities formally charged Theresa Knorr with 2 counts of murder, 2 counts of conspiracy to commit murder, and 2 special circumstances charges, multiple murder and murder by torture. Initially, Theresa pleaded not guilty to all charges. However, after learning that her son, Robert Jr., had agreed to testify against her in exchange for a reduced sentence, she changed her strategy. Theresa ultimately agreed to plead guilty on the condition that prosecutors would not seek the death penalty. On October 17, 1995, the court sentenced her to 2 consecutive life sentences. She remains incarcerated at the California Institution for Women in Chino, California. In July 2019, Theresa had a parole hearing, but was denied release. Her next opportunity for parole will not come until July 2025. As for her surviving children, William Knorr received a sentence of probation and was ordered to undergo therapy for his participation in Susan's murder. In exchange for his testimony, prosecutors dropped all charges against Robert Knorr Jr., except for 1 count of being an accessory after the fact related to Sheila's murder. Robert Jr. pleaded guilty to this charge and received a 3-year sentence, which he served concurrently with his 16-year sentence in Nevada. After escaping her mother's home, Terry married twice and eventually settled in Sandy, Utah with her second husband. In a strange twist of fate, she worked as a grocery store cashier in the same neighborhood where her mother had lived and worked before her arrest. Terry and Theresa apparently lived in close proximity without ever encountering each other. Terry Knorr died in 2011 at the age of 41, having bravely broken the silence that finally brought her mother to justice. The case of Theresa Knorr stands as one of the most horrific examples of familial abuse and murder in American criminal history, demonstrating how isolation and fear can enable unspeakable crimes to continue undetected for years, and how the courage of one survivor can ultimately bring truth to light. Thank you for staying with us through this difficult and disturbing case. The story of Theresa Knorr reminds us how crucial it is to listen when victims speak out and how persistent advocacy can eventually bring justice, even when the system initially fails. I'm curious to know, what signs of abuse do you think neighbors and authorities missed that might have saved these children sooner? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this investigation informative, please smash that like button, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell to be notified when we release our next video. Until then, stay safe, and remember that sometimes the most dangerous monsters aren't hiding under the bed, they're hiding in plain sight.